Okay, hi there, folks. What you're listening to is yet another in our series of informal presentations about elements of the research program that's ongoing to update the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. These presentations are focused on providing early information to folks in the Canadian fire management community, so they can be made aware of the changes coming to the system and what that might mean for their own operations. You'll see. I mean, these none of these presentations are highly produced or very slick looking. We've been given these presentations to individual agencies in various different live sessions for a little while now, just as time permits and and agency interest permits as well. And what we those have been great discussions, and we want to keep those discussions going. What we're trying to do is use this recorded format just to get this same information out to a broader community and use this as a jumping off point for some of those discussions with fire management agency personnel. And so this isn't meant to circumvent any discussions and feedback sessions that would be really useful. We're certainly happy as the fire danger group in the Canadian Forest Service doing the work to develop this next generation of the danger rating system. We are certainly happy to sit down with anybody from the fire management community and talk about the changes that we're considering, where those changes are at, what they might mean in terms of, your own operational use of the system or interpretation of the system. This isn't meant to circumvent any of that. This is simply meant to, this recording, informal as it is meant just to try to give you a chance to see some of this stuff if you haven't been able to see it in any of these other presentations. And we encourage you to reach out to any of us in the in the Canadian Forest Service's fire danger modeling group directly, or if you want to go through your own agency to talk to your CFC fire science rep or other CFC reps and get us linked up. We're certainly happy to talk to you about any of your concerns, or if you want to hear more about any of these products. So this is just another in a series here. There's been a few that have focused specifically on the FWI system. And the previous one that we did was on the inputs, because there are some significant inputs. I'll just highlight them again really quickly as I go through. This is focused on talking about outputs of the system, which aren't changing all that much, to be fair. So ideally, we'll be able to get through this very quickly. Just a quick summary, the same summary I'm giving at the start of all of these. All of that, we're working on modifications to all elements of the danger rating system right now. It's been ongoing for a while. We are trying to have this done by around 2025. That being said, things will continue on after that. Certainly the tech transfer knowledge extension side of this, get back to the right slide here, will be around for some time into the future as we help you all adapt to any of the changes, any of the more major changes to the system. And ideally, our own science program will be carrying on developing improvements to the system as it has for the previous decades. This is just an evolutionary step in the development of the system. I've said this on each of these sessions. I want to emphasize that. The idea is the danger rating system in Canada continues to evolve and change. So this session is all about outputs of the FWI system itself. quick reminder again, for those of you who skipped the last one, the current FWI system used throughout the day, throughout the country, on a daily basis for operational preparedness planning. And it's tracking, the outputs from the system are moisture content in key layers of the forest floor, important for different aspects of fire activity, and also relative indicators of fire behavior keyed to the period of peak burning in the late afternoon. Changes to the system, probably the most major one is the previous talk that I gave. We are moving away from the old 1 p.m. weather observation to use either hourly weather or daily maximum and minimum values. That's an important change made to create consistency and the ability to use data that is available to a number of the fire agencies currently, but also keep the system consistent with those who don't have that information. The outputs in general here are still going to be for peak burn. We have added these optional outputs on either side of the core of the FWI system that you see here. The one I'll talk most about later in this is the grassland, the set of grassland outputs. Those have a nice analog with the core of the FWI system, essentially, and we'll get into all of that here. The main outputs for the closed canopy pine type that the FWI system is based upon are still the same. Despite these changes in the weather inputs, the reality that under the hood there's an hourly calculation going on, the core outputs of the system are still going to be the values of the ISI, of the DC, the FMC at the period of peak burn, so later in the afternoon. We think this new characterization of the diurnal structure of the day will let us represent this peak burn period a bit better. But we do want to emphasize that the outputs will still be mainly this peak burn output that all of the users are familiar with. That being said, it's because of what's going on behind the scenes, that there is an hourly calculation going on underneath the hood of the system here. There are other automated applications will be able to track that throughout the day and potentially flag things if actual observed hourly weather starts to deviate from forecast weather in a way that means fire danger, fire potential might be significantly different. These are applications, again, that can be developed using this extra information that's behind the scenes and still not overwhelm decision makers at the regional level making daily decisions, I think. But that's a discussion, that you can have as folks in the fire management community can have amongst yourselves, and we're certainly happy to participate in and help provide any methods that you might want to create such an information system. So I'm going to go over each of the core outputs here. Again, they don't change that much, so I'll just try to highlight what's going to go on. This is one of the reasons that we are making these changes, is to get rid of an inconsistency between, there's essentially three different FFMCs in the danger rating system overall. The daily version that's in the current FWI system, the hourly version from Charlie Van Wagner's 1977 report that's used quite frequently in, say, fire growth modeling these days, and also the diurnal adjustment to the daily FFMC, which can be really different than the hourly FFMC calculation itself. And so there's these three are not completely consistent, and we wanted to clean things up and create a very consistent single FFMC essentially. And so what's going on in the new system is that by either using hourly data or by creating hourly data from the daily maximum and minimum values. And I point you back to our presentation on inputs. If you know, I'm not going to talk about that stuff. The system is underneath, you know, the output of the system. It's creating daily weather, or it's being given, or sorry, it's creating hourly weather or being given hourly weather, and it is doing an hourly calculation, even though the output might be for peak burn conditions. And so this is a key difference. What we will be using is the hourly FFMC calculation method. And so the daily calculation method will disappear. The hourly is a modification of that. And so it will be the core of the FWI system, essentially. We are, but that's really the only change. We are exploring right now the potential for a slight change in the drying rate function to, you know, better reflect some of the margins of weather conditions, so really hot, dry air masses that we can encounter. Just to be sure the system is capturing the drying rate on those particular days. We're exploring a couple of ways to keep the drying rate about at the same level, but have it a little bit more influenced by you know, the atmospheric conditions when you have these very dry, hot air masses. This is, again, this is just something that we're exploring right now. One of the things that we explore when we introduce a new function like this is, does it change the outputs of the system in terms of what the system is really used for? So this is all, so would such a change influence the FFMC and make it a worse predictor of, say, human-caused fire occurrence? In that way, we wouldn't want to make these changes, and we'd shelve those for a while. So we're not just trying to make it a better tracker of say the linkage between litter moisture and atmospheric moisture. We are trying to make sure that this fine fuel moisture code that we have remains a really good indicator of ignition potential, and, you know, from that, human-caused ignition potential for the day. The DUF moisture code, the daily changes really should remain the same. We've created an hourly calculation method just to be consistent, so that everything can be calculated hourly, and that rainfall, if it can be placed at the time that it occurs. But really, it amounts to the same calculation method, just divided up into to create the drying throughout the day. There's a little bit of subtlety in there, but that can be for a more detailed presentation down the road. We are exploring some changes here again to the drying rate function to make that drying rate function a little bit more, we're exploring the potential to make it based on more standard treatments of evapotranspiration potential that exist today and didn't exist when the DMC was being put together in the first place. Our goal here is to keep the drying rate about the same, about what we're used to for this particular code, and see if this in fact improves not just the estimation of moisture, but also keeps the ability to predict lightning fire occurrence intact, or ideally improves upon that. In this reformulation we're exploring, it's interesting in that it does suggest that wind speed should now play a role in influencing the drying rate of the upper organic layer. And this does fit with observations that we've made in extended studies of different stands, the classic pine stands and mixed wood stands in different parts of the country. We do see this influence of wind speed which is what the conceptual models of evapotranspiration suggest. So that there may be a weak component of wind speed that affects the drying rate of the organic layer moving forward. But for the most part, the day-to-day changes in the DMC would remain the same. The drought code, really, these changes to the drought code are right now we don't have any plans for changing the drought code. That's something that we'll look at down the road. So for this hourly calculation, we have created an hourly calculation of the drought code. Yes, that is completely absurd given that the time lag is around 50 days. But this is simply for consistent calculations in the system overall. The initial spread index, we're not planning changes currently. The only change that will likely happen is that we would add the high wind speed reformulation to the ISI that was introduced as part of the FBP system, and so there will not be these two ISIs out there anymore. That's an important one just to clean up as well. No changes planned to the buildup index formulation, nor to the fire weather index itself. What we are trying to do in this whole exercise is make sure that these small little changes in the moisture calculations that we're making don't change the general output. So what you're familiar with of an FFMC of 91, or about 10% moisture content in the forest floor, will still correspond to an FFMC of 91, in the new system as well. And we're also spending time, I think I talked about this for the FFMC and the DMC, testing how any change in these code values, even as as minor as they might be, affects the relationship between the code values and the aspects of daily fire activity for which you associate with them with. So for for the DMC, that is, we're looking at the relationship between DMC and lightning caused fire ignition, where you will be analyzing historical data sets with the new calculation method with new inputs, and and if we do in fact change the drying rate slightly, to make sure that it is at least as good, if not better, at tracking the probability of lightning ignition. Same thing with the FFMC, that any change we make still keeps the FFMC as a very good indicator of sustainable flame ignition, and so well linked to human-caused fire ignition. A couple other notes here. One of the things that these changes might bring is that it might trigger a good time to relook at the thresholds and divisions on which you create your adjective rating classifications, your values of low, moderate, high for each of the FWI system outputs. I don't think that's a bad thing, and that many agencies haven't really looked at these in decades. And so, I think there's value in re-looking at these once we have the new calculation methods solidified, even though we are thinking there won't be real significant changes in the absolute outputs. We have explored this with Ontario and creating creating some new guidance for setting these thresholds overall that we'll be looking in the next year at how to extend that nationally based on what we did in Ontario and the feedback that we got from Ontario's fire management folks, and so that may provide a bit of guidance for each of you across the country in thinking about evaluating whether your current classifications are are still doing what they're doing. And so I think this new system will, the fact that we're introducing some slight variations on the calculations is a good time to trigger everyone to have a look back at those and revisit those thresholds. And one more, we are trying to develop some guidance in terms of spring startup and fall shutdown, perhaps re-looking at the overwintering of the drought code methodology, but also including some formal guidelines for spring station calculation of FFMC and the grassland moisture component for those periods when snow is still on the ground in the forest, and the ground is still frozen, and therefore, the DMC and DC are not really changing in terms of their moisture, but when surface litter is drying and can carry fire. And so we'll provide a bit more formal guidelines that way. I want to talk just briefly about these optional outputs in the system, and mainly just jump through the grassland stream here. And this is, the response, the drying rate of fuels in grassland, and from those who are familiar with the FBP, the relationship between spread rate and wind in grasslands are much different than they are in the standard conifer type. And so we decided it would be worth having an optional output in the FWI system for those who have a lot of grassland in their region, or want specifically to look at the hazard in the grasslands in their regions, presumably in the spring. I talked in the inputs about there being some extra inputs that are optional as well, curing radiation, solar radiation or cloudiness, and fuel load, but that those all have defaults very similar to the defaults that we use in the FBP system for curing and for fuel load. So I won't go into those again here. I'm just going to step through this optional grass pathway. This grass moisture code has existed for some time, and it's been tested with, essentially it's a modification of Charlie Van Wagner's hourly FFMC from 1977, and this has been tested against the moisture content in field grass, just common field grass, essentially, both matted, down, and standing. And so there's two different models of this. The matted grassland moisture is strongly influenced by solar radiation, and heats up, can reach temperatures of 20 to 25 degrees above air temperature. And standing grass is less sensitive to solar radiation. It cools a lot better because it's so exposed to to any little wind that's passing over it. So essentially, what's happening is there's a grass moisture content model that is calculating the moisture content in, say, the surface of the matted grass layer, just like there is for the FFMC. There is a pine litter moisture model calculating the moisture content in the FFMC, and then it's converted to the code value, the fine fuel moisture code. And so that conversion in the FFMC uses something that we call the FF scale. And so we are going to use that same FF scale to convert moisture content in grassland to a code value. And so that way 10% moisture content in a grassland will correspond to a grass moisture code of 91, which is identical to what you see in pine litter in a closed canopy forest. That an FFMC of 91 means that there's about 10% moisture content in pine litter in the forest. So by using this FF scale for both, the code value will be scaled in a similar way, and so hopefully users can understand that and come to relate the two. Exposed grasslands, have a very fast time lag. It's under an hour, really, particularly if there's any solar radiation at all. and which this means that they can dry really quickly after rain, and that's what observations of from the field of from prescribed burning and from operational observations suggest that you do get fire spreading even a few hours after a rainfall under some conditions. And so this grassland moisture model can replicate that, particularly on a sunny day. The next piece of the grassland pathway here is the grassland spread index, or the grass spread index, analogous to the ISI, essentially. And really what we're going to do here is calculate the spread index itself directly from the grassland spread models in the new FBP system. Curing is an optional input, and it changes this value as well in exactly the same way that it does in the FBP system. So essentially we are driving this grassland spread index from the FBP system fuel model. So the two are linked in that regard. You don't, as a user, that doesn't matter to you. You don't need to use the FBP system for that. This is simply creating this spread index, this unitless spread index, but to do it, it is using the what will be the new grassland spread rate model in the FBP system, and it's scaled then to be this unitless indicator of spread, just like the ISI is a unitless indicator of spread in the in a typical pine stand. And so what we did to scale this currently, and this, we'll see how well this looks when we see it operationally. The rate of spread in grass, when the grass spread index is 10, corresponds to the same rate of spread in conifer in the FBP system when the ISI is 10. And so we've chosen that particular point, an ISI or GSI of 10, to correspond to the same rate of spread modeling, or rate of spread estimate in grass and in pine, essentially. And so the value of the grass spread index is scaled this way. And so it's unitless, but it's interesting, it implies that it will behave in a very linear way with rate of spread from the grass spread model. So as grassland spread index goes up, expected rate of spread goes up in a one-to-one way. There's no strange nonlinear correspondence to it at all. Because those of you familiar with FBP will know that grass spread rate goes up much more quickly than closed canopy pine spread rate, under the same sort of wind conditions and moderate values of FFMC. So what you're going to see is that the grass spread index is going to be higher than the ISI a lot of the time, just as a bit of a warning. And that's simply because, if you were plotting rate of spread from the FBP side by side, you'd see grass rate of spread is higher than conifer rate of spread a lot of the time as well. And the final piece of this stream is analogous to the FWI, and so we're just calling it the Grass Fire Weather Index. Really, like the FWI, it's a scaled indicator of Byram's fire line intensity. That's all it is. That's all FWI is behind the scenes. It's a scaled, unitless indicator of fire line intensity. It's, scaled roughly like about the square root of it, but that doesn't matter. Here, what we're doing is using a calculation from the FBP system, again, of grassland spread rate and fuel load to calculate grassland fire intensity. And then we're scaling that to the grass FWI value using the FWI system's S scale, which is not something that lots of people are familiar with, but this is how in the FWI system, the final value of FWI gets estimated from a value that's more associated with intensity, essentially. And so it's the thing that takes the I scale in the FWI system and converts it to the FWI value that we know and love right now. So really, I mean, the bottom line after all of that jargon is that the grass FWI and the FWI values itself, they should represent similar potential fire line intensity. That's about the best way to think about it. So a value of 20 in either of those, in FWI or GFWI, should represent about the same intensity. These scalings are, you know, we could use any scaling that we wanted. These are designed to try to create some familiarity between the two pathways, the standard conifer pathway and the grassland pathway. On the other end of the whole structure is the peat moisture code. This is still a work in progress, but it's been coming along well. This is going to include the ability to track, you know, moisture levels in peatlands, and whether, and the important thing is it's going to indicate whether they have the ability to sustain extended smoldering combustion. That was what we're aiming for with this index, essentially, which will be, I think, important down the road for, you know, thinking about extended holdover, deep burning in peatlands, and extended long periods of smoke production. You know, and this is a work in progress, as I say, and we are thinking about coupling this in the future with a simple spread index as well. That's going to provide, you know, an indicator of whether a standard peatland type can sustain widespread surface fire spread or high intensity surface fire spread across, you know, across it, and therefore not act as, you know, not act as an area that might be considered a fuel break, essentially. So that's something that we're thinking about as we move forward. Other optional outputs that are there in the system sometimes, the daily severity rating has existed for a long time. Some people have heard about it, some people haven't. And it's always been there as a transformation to the FWI to provide a better indication of the difficulty of control of a fire. This is, you know, this is often summarized into a monthly or seasonal metric of, you know, how challenging was this season, because because the daily severity rating is this transformation of FWI to try to get at, you know, to indicate just how challenging a fire was, to properly weight that. It provides a reasonable rating if you're wanting to summarize that up over an entire, you know, month or seasonal period. So it's often used for that, although many people across the country don't use it at all. There are, you know, we've kicked around a number of other indices that may be, you know, useful indicators, you know, for daily regional level planning, you know, where the FWI system outputs are typically used. They're not the priority in our current revision of the FWI system, but we're thinking about those, and hopefully we'll be able to circle back with agencies and talk about some of those, you know, in the near future. So just to sum up, the core of the FWI system was, and the outputs in that system are really not changing, and the interpretation shouldn't really be changing. You know, even though that there's hourly calculation going on behind the scenes, the core output that most users would use is for that period of peak burn, you know, in the later afternoon. And there are a few new optional outputs that will exist. The, you know, the most developed of those is this grassland pathway in the to supplement the closed canopy conifer type. So that just a summary of some of the outputs of the FWI system, and again, these are informal. They're just meant to give you a state of where the thinking is and the development is at the current state. We will update these and update you when when things change.